The world's largest aircraft, the Hindenburg, was preparing to leave for New Jersey, and no one on board imagined the tragedy that was about to unfold. The last surviving passenger lived until 2014, and before he died, he finally revealed what he had kept hidden for 77 years. He said he had stayed silent because he signed official papers that forced him not to speak, but on his deathbed he felt he had nothing left to lose. He confessed that not everyone on the airship was who they claimed to be. According to him, several secret agents were on board the flight. Someone, he said, intended to destroy the ship. He believed the truth had been covered up by powerful people, and that the explosion was not just an accident but the beginning of something far more disturbing. The Hindenburg itself was born from a dream shared by a nation determined to dominate the skies. Germany had spent decades perfecting lighter-than-air travel and building Zeppelins, and by 1936 they felt ready to build something larger and more advanced than anything ever constructed. Under the leadership of Dr. Hugo Eckener, one of the world's most respected airship experts, engineers slowly assembled the LZ-129 Hindenburg inside an enormous hangar in Friedrichshain. When it rolled out for the first time, people struggled to grasp its size. It stretched 245 meters, nearly 804 feet, with a diameter of 41 meters. No other flying machine came close to matching it. Inside its shiny metal skeleton were 16 massive gas cells that could hold about 200,000 cubic meters of lifting gas, more than 7 million cubic feet. The original plan was to fill the cells with helium, a safe, non-flammable gas. But the United States, the only major supplier of helium, had banned exports in 1925 because it considered helium rare and important for national security. American officials refused to make any exception, especially not for a German airship in the 1930s. With no other option, the builders turned to hydrogen. Hydrogen lifted more weight and allowed the ship to travel faster, but everyone knew it was highly flammable. That one decision haunted the Hindenburg for the rest of its brief life. Still, when the ship launched in March 1936, it stunned the world. Newspapers called it a floating palace and the finest achievement of German engineering. 2 full decks were reserved for passengers. There were 25 private cabins, a beautiful dining room, a comfortable lounge, and even a smoking room, which was possible only because of complex safety designs that kept flames sealed behind airtight doors. A bartender named Max Schulze watched the room carefully, making sure no one carried cigarettes or lighters out into the rest of the ship. Everyone understood that, despite its beauty, the Hindenburg required constant caution. For a while, the ship lived up to every expectation. 4 Daimler-Benz diesel engines pushed it through the air at around 125 km per hour, or 78 miles per hour. It crossed the Atlantic in half the time of the fastest ships at sea. In 1936, it completed 17 round-trip voyages, 10 to the United States and 7 to Brazil, without a single injury. Passengers enjoyed fine meals, listened to music, and watched the world pass beneath them through long gallery windows. The Hindenburg became the first aircraft to offer regular passenger service between Europe and the Americas, and many people saw it as the future of long-distance travel. But even during those smooth months, fears never completely disappeared. Dr. Eckener repeatedly argued that the ship should use helium, warning that hydrogen was always a risk, no matter how careful the crew was. American restrictions made helium impossible to obtain, but some German officials ignored the danger, claiming the Hindenburg had already flown safely for years using hydrogen. Still, a few people quietly worried that the confidence would not last forever. In early 1937, the Hindenburg prepared for a new season of flights. Its first North American trip was scheduled for May. By this time, Dr. Eckener had been pushed aside for political reasons, and Captain Max Pruss was in command. Captain Ernst Lehrmann, one of the most experienced airship pilots in the world, joined the trip only as an observer. He was grieving the recent death of his young son and carried that sadness with him when he boarded. He also carried something else, a disturbing letter warning that a bomb would destroy the ship on a future flight. The letter came from someone in Milwaukee whom he did not know. Lehrmann did not fully believe the threat, but it worried him enough that he folded the letter and kept it in his pocket during the journey. 3 Luftwaffe officers were also on the passenger list, traveling in civilian clothing. Their official explanation was that they were studying long-range airship operations. Later rumors suggested they had been placed on board to stop a saboteur, but during the American investigation after the disaster, they denied any secret mission. They did confirm, however, that an unusually strict baggage inspection had taken place because of an anonymous warning. Whatever the truth, once the ship left Frankfurt on the evening of May 3rd, no one spoke of sabotage again. If someone dangerous was on board, they kept themselves hidden. The airship carried 36 passengers and 61 crew members, including a 14-year-old cabin boy named Werner Franz. This was only his second trip to America, and he spent his time serving coffee, cleaning, and doing everything possible to prove he deserved the position that his older brother had helped him get. He felt proud, excited, and eager to do well. The flight went smoothly across the Atlantic, though delays meant the ship arrived late on the U.S. coast. By the afternoon of May 6, the Hindenburg flew over New York City, where passengers marveled at the skyline. From above, the streets looked like tiny lines and the cars like dots of light moving slowly along. People pressed their faces to the windows, amazed by the view. After circling Manhattan, the ship headed toward its destination, the Lakehurst Naval Air Station in New Jersey. When it arrived, stormy weather forced Captain Pruss to delay the landing. Strong winds and rain made it unsafe, so the Hindenburg floated along the New Jersey coast, drifting above beach towns as crowds gathered below to stare at the enormous silver shape in the sky. Finally, around 6 p.m., the weather improved. At 6:22 the crew received clearance to land. By 7 o'clock, the captain guided the ship toward the field for a flying moor landing, which required dropping ropes from about 200 feet so the ground team could pull the ship down. At 7:21, everything seemed normal. Crewmen released ballast water, adjusting the ship's balance. The mooring lines were dropped and grabbed by the ground crew. A light rain began to fall. In the control car, Pruss and Learman felt a small tug when one of the ropes tightened too much, but they assumed it was nothing serious. No one realized that inside the tail of the ship, danger was already building. At 7:25, the world changed in a heartbeat. People on the ground saw a strange movement near the top of the ship, as if part of the outer skin had puffed outward. Some saw a blue glow, likely static electricity, running along the surface. Then came a dull boom, soft at first, then followed by a burst of flames. Fire shot up from the top of the ship near the tail. Witnesses described it as a bright orange flower blooming along the spine of the airship. Within seconds, the entire rear was engulfed. Radio reporter Herbert Morrison, who had been calmly narrating the landing, suddenly cried out in panic. His emotional words, "Oh, the humanity," would become famous worldwide. Inside the ship, chaos erupted instantly. In the lower fin, helmsman Helmut Lau heard the muffled boom and saw a flash of bright light. The heat was so intense that one of the gas cells disappeared in flames in seconds. Fire raced from one hydrogen cell to the next, swallowing the framework and fabric. As the rear burned, it lost lift and dropped quickly. The nose, still full of unburned hydrogen, lifted upward at a steep angle. People were thrown across rooms. Furniture slid and crashed. Passengers screamed as smoke filled the hallways. Major Hans-Hugo Witt was inside the lounge when the ship tilted sharply. He slid across the floor as tables and chairs tumbled into a heap. Through an opening in the ceiling, he saw flames moving above them. In the bow, 9 crewmen were working with the mooring lines when a massive burst of fire shot through the nose. Many were killed instantly, while others leapt from the ship in desperation. Throughout the craft, survival depended entirely on where each person was standing. Those close to windows had the best chances. Some climbed out and jumped just before the ship hit the ground. Others were trapped deeper inside, struggling through smoke and fire. The entire disaster lasted less than a minute. The Hindenburg collapsed in a fiery heap as firefighters and soldiers rushed toward the wreckage, pulling survivors out of the flames. The hydrogen burned so fast that some people near openings escaped with only minor injuries, while others just a few feet away suffered fatal burns. Later, investigators searched for answers, but no single explanation was ever proven. Some believed static electricity ignited leaking hydrogen. Others blamed a broken part inside the tail. There were also whispers of sabotage, but no evidence was found. Despite this, the last survivor insisted until his final breath that someone on board had planned the destruction. What is certain is that the Hindenburg disaster ended the era of passenger airships forever. The giant craft that once symbolized the future of travel vanished in less than a minute, leaving behind only twisted metal, dark smoke, and the haunting memories of those who lived through it. The people trapped deep inside the burning airship felt almost no hope as the disaster unfolded around them. Flames were spreading so quickly that even those who had stayed calm before were now desperate to escape. Chief Steward Heinrich Kubis hurried to the large promenade windows, pushed them open, and shouted at the passengers to jump if they wanted to live. Many listened to his warning. Those who survived often escaped by jumping from heights between 20 and 50 feet, either before the ship hit the ground or just as it began to fall. Circus acrobat Joseph Spar kicked out a window, leapt into the open air, broke his ankle, and still managed to survive. Others landed on sand or grass, suffering injuries but staying alive, grateful that they had chosen to jump when they did. Some of the most painful scenes involved families trying to stay together even as fire rushed toward them. One mother, Matilda Dana, was with her 3 children in the portside dining room when the tail of the airship suddenly exploded in flames. She reacted instantly. She grabbed her 2 young sons, Walter, who was 10, and Werner, who was 8, and threw them out of the window, choosing their lives over hesitation. Both boys survived the fall. Her oldest child, 16-year-old Irene, was harder to lift. Matilda desperately tried but could not get her daughter through the window. With fire closing in around her, she was forced to jump herself. She hit the ground hard and broke her pelvis, but she lived. Irene, trapped inside, was rescued later but died from severe burns. Their father, Herman, had stepped outside the ship moments before the fire started and never returned, leaving behind questions that would never be fully answered. Many of the crew chose to stay at their posts even though they knew the danger was growing by the second. Helmsman Ludwig Loh died in the lower fin while trying to do his job. Radio operator Willy Speck continued sending messages until the flames reached him. Rigger Ludwig Knorr stayed until the very last instant and survived with severe burns. Max Schultz, the well-liked bartender on B-deck, was probably cleaning the smoking lounge when the fire started. Kubis later said he had seen Schultz wiping the bar only minutes earlier after serving what would be his final drinks. When the flames swept through, Schultz became trapped. He might have been knocked down by the sudden tilt of the ship or overwhelmed by smoke. The 60-year-old never made it out. His remains were discovered in the wreckage, and his death certificate simply recorded that he died in the Zeppelin explosion. The burns were so severe that little could be said beyond that. When the burning airship finally collapsed into the field at Lakehurst, many watching assumed everyone inside had died. But as the thick smoke slowly began to clear, something unexpected happened. Dark shapes began to move. Survivors crawled out of the wreck, some limping, some staggering, and some walking with blank, shocked expressions as though they had just returned from another world. Out of the 97 people on board, 62 lived. On the ground, one Navy crewman died when falling wreckage landed on him. In the end, 36 lives were lost, and many others suffered broken bones, burns, and emotional scars that would last the rest of their lives. Even in the middle of the chaos, people showed incredible bravery. For a moment, the Navy ground crew stood frozen, shocked by the sight in front of them, but Chief Petty Officer Frederick Bull Tobin broke the spell. He shouted, "Navy men, stand fast!" and his men rushed into action. They ran directly into the fire to pull survivors out, ignoring the explosions and falling debris around them. Fire crews and medics arrived within minutes, and survivors were carried to the base infirmary or to nearby hospitals as quickly as people could lift them. In the middle of all this terror, unbelievable stories of courage began to appear. One of the most astonishing belonged to a boy who seemed to have almost no chance at survival. His name was Werner Franz, the 14-year-old cabin boy whose job that evening was simple: clean up the officers' mess, stack dishes, and hope the weather improved so he could get time off the ship. When the landing alarm sounded around 7:15 p.m., he continued working. He wiped down tables and put dishes away. Then he heard a dull thud behind him, the sound of the port rope hitting the ground. All the lights flickered and went out. An instant later, the ship jerked violently. The tail rose sharply into the air, throwing everything off balance. All the plates Werner had just stacked burst out of the cupboard and smashed across the floor. Werner stepped into the keel corridor to see what had happened, and the sight nearly froze him in place. Far down the passageway, a ball of fire was racing toward him. The entire back of the ship was already swallowed by flames, and the hydrogen cells were collapsing one by one. Heat blasted forward, hitting him like a wave. Werner stumbled backward up the steep catwalk, grabbing ropes to keep from falling as the angle of the ship grew sharper. His feet slipped, and for a moment he thought he would slide straight into the approaching fire. He clung desperately to anything within reach, convinced he was about to die. Then something unexpected happened, a moment of pure luck that saved his life. A ballast tank above him tore loose as the ship's structure began to fail. Hundreds of gallons of water poured out at once. The huge splash soaked Werner completely and jolted him out of his panic. The water drenched his clothes, giving him just enough protection from the intense heat rushing forward. Airship historian John Provan later said Werner had been in the only place on the ship where such a miracle could happen, directly under the tank that burst at exactly the right moment. Now fully awake, dripping wet, and thinking clearly again, Werner remembered a small provisioning hatch ahead on the starboard side of the keel. It was a narrow square opening used to load supplies, and he knew it might be his only chance. He tried to climb toward it, but the angle of the ship was still too steep. He could only hold on to a rope and wait. When the bow finally dipped downward again, giving him a small patch of level footing, he pushed himself forward. He reached the hatch, braced himself, and kicked it open with both feet. The metal cover flew outward. Below him, the ground rushed closer. It looked to be only 20 feet away. Werner jumped. For a split second, as he fell through the air, he felt the ship rising behind him again. The bow had bounced on impact, giving him only a brief moment to escape before the burning wreck came down again. He remembered his training: never run in the direction the wind is blowing. The flames would follow the wind. So the instant he hit the ground, he spun and ran upwind under the hull. Only seconds later, the rest of the airship collapsed on the exact spot where he would have been. Had he run the other way, the fire would have swallowed him. When he finally stumbled out from under the wreck, he stood trembling, covered in water and soot, hardly able to believe he was alive. He checked himself. No burns. No broken bones. Nothing but bruises and shaking hands. Wet, but alive, he said later, his first words after escaping. Still in shock, he helped others throw water on the remaining fires. The next day, he returned to the smouldering skeleton of the ship with Lieutenant George Watson. He wanted one thing: his pocket watch, a gift from his grandfather. He had left it in the officers' mess. Picking through the charred wreckage, he found it exactly where he expected, scorched but still intact. He also picked up a small piece of twisted aluminum as a keepsake. Years later, he would show reporters that pocket watch as proof of his unbelievable survival. Other survivors carried their own memories of the disaster. Major Hans Hugo Witt was one of them. He had been pulled from the flaming wreckage by fellow crew members, half conscious and wrapped in smoke. He remembered sliding across the lounge floor as the ceiling glowed red above him, the heat pushing down like a giant hand. Realizing the ship was falling, he ran to an observation window and jumped from nearly 20 feet up. He never remembered hitting the ground. All he remembered was waking up surrounded by fire. Some part of the collapsing wreckage must have struck him, trapping him under burning metal and cables. By chance, Lieutenant Hinkelbein, the same man who had stood near him when the fire began, landed close by. He saw Witt lying motionless with flaming cables wrapped around his neck. Hinkelbein rushed forward, tore at the burning wires with the help of another man, and dragged Witt away before he was crushed. Witt was alive but badly burned, and he spent weeks in hospitals recovering. On May 28, 1937, still in pain, he testified before the U.S. Commerce Department. Like others, he said he had seen no bomb, no device, no sign of sabotage, only fire. Another powerful voice came from Herbert Morrison, the reporter whose emotional broadcast became famous. His recording was so passionate that many listeners believed it had been aired live, but it was actually played the next day. His voice cracked as he watched the ship fall, and when he cried, "Oh, the humanity!" people around the world felt his pain. Years later, he explained that he cried because he thought everyone had died. When he later learned that most had survived, he hoped his words had not made the tragedy sound worse than it was. His broadcast, paired with newsreel footage, turned the Hindenburg disaster into one of the earliest media-driven catastrophes, replayed over and over in theaters and radio stations across the world. Some survivors used their shock to document what they had seen. Among them were the journalist Leonard Adelt and his wife, Gertrude. They had been passengers on the ship and escaped with injuries. While at the Lakehurst Infirmary, Adelt saw a sight he would never forget. Captain Ernst Lehrmann, one of the most respected airship commanders in the world, sat quietly on a table. His body was badly burned, but he remained calm, watching the frantic scene around him. Adelt approached and asked, "What happened?" Lehrmann, barely able to speak, whispered a single word: "Blitzschlag, lightning." Even while suffering, he was searching for answers. Adelt went to receive his own treatment, not knowing he had spoken to Lehrmann for the last time. During the night, Lehrmann's condition worsened. His burns looked less severe than those of Captain Pruss, but hot gas had scorched his lungs. On the morning of May 7th, Commander Rosendahl visited him in the hospital. Lehrmann was weak but fully aware. He talked calmly about the future of airships, even though he knew he did not have long to live. He discussed every possible explanation for the disaster, but everything came back to uncertainty. He mourned the loss of the ship he had served with such passion. Then, with clear determination, he made one final recommendation. No matter what caused the disaster, the next airship must use helium, not hydrogen. It was a painful reversal of his earlier belief, an acknowledgement that the warnings he had once pushed aside had been right. As their conversation ended, Lehrmann gave Rosendahl his final opinion. Quietly, he said, It must have been an infernal machine, meaning a bomb. In his final hours, he believed only a deliberate device could have caused such destruction. His words, like the memories of every survivor, became part of the story that people would retell for generations. Each person carried a piece of the truth, shaped by fear, confusion, bravery, and the desperate will to live. And together, their voices helped the world understand the nightmare of that night and the remarkable strength of those who made it out alive.